This week on the Squatchers Lounge podcast, David and the Reverend Jeff continue our look at Sasquatch history and talk about the man, the legend, Mr. John Green. Tonight we're going to discuss his investigations, his work, and the legacy he left behind. I don't know about some of you guys would be surprised about the degree of work that he actually did. Not bad for an old-time squatcher. So without further ado, I give to you the man who still smells like Bluff Creek, the Reverend Jeff Kelly.
Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Squatchers Lounge podcast. I am so glad to be back in off of the mountain. I got to tell you, 4 hard days of 7,200 feet plus is a wonderful way to spend a week. But boy, does it feel good to get back to normal altitudes. I don't know how people do it, David. That is crazy. With me, as always, I do have my sidekick, David Batdorf, my co-host, my man, my rock, my scientist. How you doing this week, buddy?
Good. I'm glad to be back on topic, and this is a great topic. John Green is like one of the guys that always excited me, forever. So this is good.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. And John was always one of the guys that was a staple and right there in your face all along the way. I mean, my discovery of Bigfoot, really came in 1977. It was the late 1977 when the predecessor of Star Wars came to the drive-in movie theater. Right before it was the Bigfoot Monsters and Mysteries 1967 filming of Patty, and I think that's exactly where I fell in love with Bigfoot right there. And school, John Green's books were coming out as I was going through elementary school, so it was like new stuff. Wow, hey, there's a new Bigfoot book. Almost every year that we went to elementary school, there was a new Bigfoot book in the library for us to read. I mean, I don't know why they were included in our library, but they were, and it was fantastic, and I got to read all of them when they first came out.
Yeah, and John Green authored quite a few books, and he's, but mostly what he's done, he's taken a journalistic approach and an analytical approach to the subject, and that's what I always really appreciated about the guy.
Yeah, exactly. And we're going to go ahead and get right into that in just a few minutes. There's a few things we're going to talk about first up tonight. Just right before the show, the last Bigfoot North radio show was on tonight, and I guess there was, I guess they were really successful where they were, and congratulations on that. I guess it's not hard to be the number one Bigfoot show on a channel that doesn't have any other Bigfoot shows. I can tell you that I'm the number one channel. I'm the number one Bigfoot show on my channel too. So was a good run. We'll see what comes of it. Maybe they're going to go out and do some researching now. But one of the things that he posted up right here that kind of crooked me just wrong was he reposted Dr. Bindernagel's statement about the use of the word squatch and squatching. And David and I, you and I went over that statement before showtime, so I'm not going to sit here and read the entire thing to you. But basically, Dr. Bindernagel is berating everyone for using the term squatch and squatching in relation to even amateur Bigfoot researching, as it's a jolt in the side to the Aboriginal people who originated the word. And I got to tell you, let's not bring this whole political correctness into it. But at the very end of it, my take on this whole thing was Dr. Meldrum's agreeal and berating to even the amateurs. Let's keep the professionalism high. Let's strive to keep the standards of professionalism high. Well, Dr. Meldrum, this isn't going to be very popular, and a lot of people are going to yell at me for this. But, sir, when you stop working with a known hoaxer and point that finger in your own direction to keep the professionalism high, I'll consider taking your advice. As for the use of the word squatch and squatching, well, being of Native American descent, there's much like this big controversy thing with the Washington Redskins. We got to change the name of the Washington Redskins. And I got to tell you, it's only the politicians and the crapheads who really give a crud about it, because if you ask us Native Americans, we don't have a problem with the Washington Redskins. Had it be the Washington Heathens, yes, maybe we'd have a problem with it. But I really honestly think outside of the localization of the Aboriginal people that he's talking about, I really kind of think you're alienating a large group of people over nothing myself. David, what are your thoughts on that?
Bigfoot, Squatch, like these are all terms that refer to a creature. We know what we're talking about when we're talking about, hey, I'm going to go squatching. Well, maybe that's a good disambiguation from, hey, I'm going to do some field research on the topic of the North American wood ape. Maybe that's a good disambiguation of what you're actually doing. Like, hey, I'm going to go hiking and hope I find a freaking footprint. So, but the word squatch is no less derogatory than the word Sasquatch, because Sasquatch is like we've talked about this time and time again. It's an anglicization, and if it's alienating, or disrespecting anyone, it's disrespecting the people who live 10 miles to the east of who created the word Siskauts, that has nothing to do with Sasquatch, because Scanicum and Siskauts and all these other S words were combined together to create a word that doesn't actually exist. There is no Sasquatch in the dialects up here, which is where
for the animal.
Yeah, I mean, there's a Seskets, there's a Scanicum, there's the Chwatlech, there like all of these other words. So the disrespect is already in the name, based upon the fact that we just made it up. Like, it's like, okay, we're gonna smash all these words together, and they all kind of sound like Sam Squanch. So we're already disrespecting the heritage of the tribal names, and people on the other side of the world, like they're calling them, Almas or Yeren or Oma or like Orang Pendek. Like these are like, it has nothing to do, maybe they're different creatures, maybe they're different anything, but this is not any more derogatory a word. It's like having, so my friend's 7-year-old was at the zoo, and somebody's kneeling over their child, said, "Hey, look at the monkey," and the 7-year-old looks over at the man and says, "That's not a monkey, that's an ape, it's a gorilla."
Awesome for him.
So
man.
my friend looks over at his son and says, "Don't worry about it." That's where we're at with this. Like, squatching, squatch, Sasquatch. You know what? Don't worry about it. You bring me in a type specimen, and we're going to give it a scientific name, and then we'll use the appropriate nomenclature, and then we can talk about that. That kind of boils my blood, because like I live where that name was pretty much bastardized from, and I know the names that surround me, and it has nothing to do with Sasquatch. And Brian, I'm sorry, that's the end of it. So if you're gonna say that's, use the word Sasquatch, you're still like, you might as well use the word Bigfoot.
Right. And I totally agree. So I mean, so to kind of shake your finger at people for using a made up word to describe a creature that we can't prove exists and put it out on the known animal creature, it's just kind of, I'm sorry, get your ego in check, sir. I mean, there's a lot of people that came before you. There'll be a lot of people that come after you, and I hope maybe you've come to your senses. Maybe that's why you're not working with Bigfoot North anymore. I don't know. And really, to tell you the truth, isn't my place to really care anymore. I've got my own thing that I'm doing on, and I'm not going to really worry about having a finger pointed at me anymore. And speaking of my own thing going on, I got to tell you, man, I was invited up with the Sierra Site Evidence Initiative up in the High Sierras this past week. And I got to tell you, I wanted to be there firsthand I had to see it. There's some questions in my mind that needed answered, and they couldn't be answered by satellite maps. They couldn't be answered by interviews that I've done with people. I mean, there's answers that needed to be seen firsthand to experience the terrain itself before any of it actually made sense. Satellite maps are one thing. You can learn a lot from them, but having your feet literally right there where the thermal footage was taken, where the animals were shot, I got to tell you, just the whole scene makes incredible sense as to why there were Sasquatch there when he got to the end of that road.
I've been saying that for a couple years now. Like I went down there, and that entire story that you kind of you make up your own image of like that original, some of the Blog Talk Radios, that original Justin Smeha story or whatever, and like this works in a lot of ways. Like you hear something and somebody tries to explain it to you in a way that makes sense. And you pick up the key points, and in my mind, I had created a completely different image, and I'd been there before. Phil did his breakdown with satellite imagery and all that, but like you create a completely different image than what you come up to, and then walking through that scenario without any explanation based on the stories, like it all makes complete sense once you're there. And that was a really kind of mind-blowing experience. It's like, no, this place makes sense. Like every point is included in there, and my mind and my vision of what had of the story was incorrect until I got there, and it all made sense at that point. It was kind of crazy, and I'm sure you went through the same thing, Jeff.
It really was. I mean, we got up there. We got up to the first day, and I'm not going to share a whole lot of pictures right now because I got some videos coming out, and we're going to discuss about that after those come out. But I got up there the first day, and Justin took me through the long process of the entire event. I mean, and he and I are both hunters, so I mean, he understands me. I understand how to track things. I understand how to follow things. So he didn't have to go through the long story with me. We went basically. He walked me right through his steps. I mean, I watched his actions in front of me as to what happened, and there's no reason that it didn't happen that way. But my thing is where's the water? Everybody keeps telling me, oh, there's water all over the place. I'm like, yeah, but there is, but there isn't. For me, to feel conducive to long-term Bigfoot activity, there has to be a spring. I've always seen you guys hear me talk about spring and Bigfoot action seem to go hand in hand. Well, there's a spring right there. I finally found it, and I'm very happy about the fact that there's a spring right exactly where I expected it to be. I mean, literally, within 50 yards of where I expected there to be a spring, there was. And everything clicked directly into place for me. And we hiked around a good 2.5, 3 miles, looking for tracks, looking for activity, looking at the food sources. I found 5 different berries in the first 20 minutes of my being there. Now, they weren't ripe, but they were 5 different types of edible berry bushes that I was staring at within 40 yards of where I was standing, not including the miles of skunk cabbage, the conifer tips that are just full of vitamin C, freshwater supply, and then, there's, at that particular level, we'll talk about it, the food sources changed. And that's what, the activity was very, very light for us. I haven't gone through all of the video and everything, but we pretty much came to the conclusion that it was just way too early to be up quite that high in the summertime because the food sources weren't there yet.
Which exactly, and that's what we keep talking about. It's like but as you go lower, the amount of area that you have to cover becomes so much more vast. It's like but as those resources come up, they actually become more abundant per square meter. Because right. It's almost like if you stretch a balloon over a conical shape, the mass of the balloon is going to be closer together and all and it's going to stretch as you come down. It's almost how the actual resources worked, where that late summertime there's a superb abundance of resources way up there, which is really hard to pinpoint unless you go to an area quite often. But then you have to hope also that a Sasquatch is utilizing that same area. But if it's not, and if you find that dense area, like this kill site becomes at some point, just doing a perimeter around whatever peak or whatever, but unfortunately that becomes like miles and miles and miles and a lot of vertical distance, and a lot of it's not as traversable as you would hope.
That's exactly right, and that becomes part of the issue up there. Is we were up there for 2.5 nights. After the first 24 hours, and I made this mistake, and I'm going to go ahead and own up to it. I put myself way too out there, way too fast at 7,200 feet, and the next day I caught myself a real nasty case of altitude sickness. And when I say, I mean, I'm talking vertigo, weakness, gray skin, vomiting, diarrhea, couldn't swallow any food for nearly 24 hours. If I had been up there by myself, I would have been in a lot of trouble because I don't think I could have driven down the mountain to get below it. So people, if you're going above 6,250 feet, please, A, make sure that you're going with somebody. And B, I would recommend what pulled me out of it is basically an IV in parts. Take some small packets of salt, some small packets of sugar, and a bottle of Gatorade with you. Then at the point that you start to feel like you're getting altitude sickness, you drink the entire bottle of Gatorade, put the salt on your tongue, put half the pack of sugar on your tongue, and get it all down. Because that's basically an IV without it being in your veins. And you'll literally start to feel better within 20-25 minutes of it. You let it go too long, and it's tough to pull out of. I mean, it literally took me 24 hours to be completely feeling better, as though another hour or two I would have been out of it. But that particular day, we went ahead and dropped altitude because there just wasn't enough animal activity up at those high altitudes. Not even the rodents were there. I sat for 2 nights, and we sat all night long, using our tactics to try and call it the Sasquatch up the mountain, and I couldn't even get owls to come up to the mountain. I mean, I literally couldn't even. I mean, the first
that's too far.
the day that we got there, there were some other people up there squatching, and they said that they had heard owls for like 45 minutes and then didn't hear them anymore. And then for the next 2 nights, I couldn't call any a great horn sound. I couldn't call nothing, and I was really surprised because that's one of my specialties is calling in owls. But nothing responded. So that meant that the rodent sources were even lower. So the next day, we went ahead and packed up and dropped down to another site, and we dropped down like 1,500 feet. And I got to tell you, even then, there were still no berries ready, and there still weren't any rodents. I mean, there were some wood rats, and there were some things around, but there weren't any ground squirrels, no chipmunks, no nothing until you dropped even another 1,000 feet. So once you drop the first 1,000 feet, you go from 1 million acres to 5 million acres. And then when you drop that next 1,000 feet, you go from 5 million acres to 15 million acres. And where the actual berries were and the real food sources were probably down in the valley level around 5,000 feet. So, you're talking now 30 million acres that you're trying to search for 20 Bigfoot.
Exactly. But as the biomass follows that resource is what I'm talking about. It's like stretching a balloon over the top of a mountain, and it thins out as the farther you go out, and where you put that, like when it comes up, like you'll know when you're in the right place at the right time, because you can't walk 1,000 yards without finding an animal, and a large animal.
Right. Now, we did see a lot of wildlife that were up there. We saw a lot of resident bear. I personally saw 5 different bear. We saw a blondie going in. I saw another blondie, a spirit bear, and then 2 small black cubs that were running up over an open meadow, which I was on a quad at the time. I tried to chase them down to see if I could see Mama, but they were just way too fast and going places that quad wasn't even thinking about going. So, but I think we saw a total of 30 bear sightings total over the weekend over all of us, and another 40 to 50 black-tailed deer. There was a little bit of raccoon tracks, but I couldn't find any actual raccoons. So that food source also, the eggs weren't up there because, like I said, there weren't even really all that many birds. There were a bunch of songbirds on the last day, but I mean, there weren't any real egg-laying birds for the varmint to be in after. Once we dropped that 1,500 feet elevation for the next night of elevation, we started finding Justin got a hand of some scat. And I don't know if you guys know Justin very well, but if he picks up some poop, he's going to play with it, dig through it, see what's in it, who's eating it, find out what it's been eating. I mean, that's just one of the things that trackers do. And we went all the way through it, and there was nothing but meat, hair, and beetles in it. Now, what would that tell you, David?
Meat, hair, and beetles? That's the beetles is the interesting part.
Well, it's all carnivore.
Yeah, but it's going to be a cat. Probably not a big cat, a smaller cat. But.
Yeah, that's exactly what we were thinking. We're thinking it's either a juvenile lion or a big bobcat. More than likely the big bobcat. But there was absolutely no grasses in it whatsoever because he was trying to decide whether it could have been bear whatsoever because it was decent size. maybe a small bear. And I was like, if there's no grasses in it, chances are that's going to be cat, because almost everything else is going to be an omnivore up here. And sure enough, we found no traces of grasses in it. And there were lots of grasses around. I mean, that was one of the things that was odd that we found up there was this particular season. The cows came through there and smashed the crap out of it last year early and then moved on. And this year it has recovered to the point that they've never seen the vegetation so nice up there so early. I mean, it really is just so you can't step 5 feet without crunching on newly grown berry vines and skunk cabbage. I mean, that's really how thick it was up there. I mean, even on the hillsides, there were all kinds of different flowering foods getting ready. You know, another month, and it'll probably start early berries up there. That's where we're at. I don't even think they flowered yet, but they're healthy and ready to go, that's for sure. So, that's good news for us. The members of the Squatchers Lounge will probably have noticed I posted a picture of Adam Davies and myself up there from the kill site. Adam Davis is how it's actually pronounced. I guess the British people have a silent E or something. I don't know, but Adam Davis, as we were all corrected up there. You guys have probably seen him on Monster Quest episodes.
I was going to say, there's like 5 episodes of Monster Quest mispronounced his name. That would have just drive the crap out of me.
yeah, exactly. The guy was up there with us. He's a Brit, and Brits vacation, and he vacations looking for monsters. I mean, that's really the orang pendek. He's been to the Congo looking for the dinosaur. He's been to the Himalayas looking for the Yeti. I mean, the guy's literally been. If there's a Bigfoot type creature all over the world, this guy's been looking for it. And this literally was his first American Bigfoot trip, looking for Bigfoot. And I finally asked him, I'm like, Adam, why didn't you come before this? He says, well, to be honest with you, mate, I wasn't really sure Bigfoot existed. He says, it just didn't make any sense. And I went, well, now what do you think? He says, yeah, there's some squatchy things around here, that's for sure. He's a super nice guy. God, I can't say anything bad about the man.
Well, yeah, he's one of those guys who just he really goes out and does legitimate inquiry into all of these different places, and I wish I could jet set with that cat. Hey, that would be a good time, and I'll say it, that's not a vacation. Apparently that's holiday over there. I think they take holiday.
He was on holiday to America for 3 weeks. I'd love to have a 3-week vacation 4 times a year myself. I think that would be kick ass. The guy's caught a lot of flack over his trip up there to Dr. Johnson's site, and I'm not going to discuss anything that Adam discussed with us up at the site with us, because it's not for me to do so. He'll share it in good time, and that's what they're doing. What I can say is, after 2 days of hanging out with David and literally getting the intimate details enough that could be shared with me. I mean, anything that Dr. Johnson wanted to keep private was kept private. Adam was a very upstanding man with that, but there were some things he could share with us that were personal experience. My attitude hasn't changed. I have always said from the beginning, and I will repeat it again right here, I've never said that Dr. Johnson does not have Bigfoot on his site. I just said I wish somebody else was the one investigating it. That's what I've said all along. I mean, it very well may be that he has Bigfoot there, but they're not 900-pound Bigfoot on those owl calls. Everything is not Bigfoot. If you've convinced yourself that everything is Bigfoot, then your results are useless. You've got to come to some kind of realistic expectation for results. If everything is a Bigfoot, then you should have solved the problem by now. DNA seems to be the key. Let's get some snares. Let's get some DNA hooks. If the Bigfoot are really coming in there and taking your peanut butter and jammy sandwiches, so be it. Let's hang some small fish hooks super glued off to the damn thing, and let's get some DNA swabs. Let's actually get some chunk of hair. Let's get a piece of skin. Let's get it done. Yeah, they're going to be pissed off, and yeah, they're probably going to run away, but you've got the answer. Kind of my take on it.
And again, it depends on what is your role in this degree of inquiry. I've kind of gone off on a tangent here, but there are the people that want to have the interaction for themselves, and sometimes they create a lot of Bigfoot activity that's not Bigfoot activity, whatever. Like, but they want to have the interaction for themselves.
Right.
Then there's the public version where these interactions are probably serving a different purpose in a public domain, and then there's the people that just want some answers, like Justin. Like that's a legitimate response to, I had this experience, I can't explain it, I'm gonna kill another one.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. You can't blame anybody but yourself. If you're so upset that he killed the first one, and now you're super upset that he's going to kill the second one because you didn't believe that he killed the first one. If you'd have believed the man for being honest for what himself is and just agreed that the story happened, that it sucks that we didn't have a body to produce for it, he probably would have been done with Bigfoot and moved on like every other hunter who's taken a shot at one over the years. But no, you've specifically gone out of your way to hate him, make him feel stupid, make his family not believe him, and call him a liar. I think the man has no other choice but to prove you people wrong.
Yeah. So think of it this way: like, there's two things going on here. One, like the Bigfoot community, which at this point Justin could really give two shits about. Let's just be honest. Like so the Bigfoot community pushed him like to validate his story, and well, he couldn't. There was not, like, because of the situation, believe him or not, like, it's not a story that can be validated because of the components of the story. So, like, we pushed him into that, but mainstream, belief is not going to attach to this, and he's like I had a conversation with Justin that, like, around a campfire at the kill site, like, what, I'm not even really interested in Bigfooters anymore. Like, I have to do this because this needs to be truth.
Yeah, I need an answer.
And that was his purpose for, again, years later, like when did the shooting take? The 2010?
Yeah,
2010, 4 years later,
now.
And this guy is still out there.
Putting his own money into this,
on a regular basis. So, which is, I mean, that's great. Is that the most, like, unreasonable response to a misidentification ever? Well, that leads us back into maybe tonight's topic.
Yep. That's exactly where we're going.
Of John Green's database. Like, is this
right.
the most compelling group of misidentifications ever, or is there something to it?
That's right. Is there something to it? Well, on to the topic of back to hand of Mr. John Green. I actually have a great little dealio for you here. Let me go ahead and bring that up. It's basically in John Green's own words of what's compelled him through all the years to keep looking for the elusive Sasquatch. So let's go ahead and we'll bring that up for you. And, John has some real strong ideas on how and what we should do to prove the Sasquatch creature, and we'll talk about that directly afterwards. But here's what an interviewer asked John about the question of Bigfoot and, why he's pursued it.
What do you think the Sasquatch is? Of course, an ape, a bipedal ape. I mean, you've got two facts that cannot be in any way challenged. Something makes huge, somewhat human-like footprints, and it should be possible to find out what that something is. And also, all over the world and throughout history, and in very much so at the present time, people have been describing seeing these very large, hair-covered, bipedal animals.
So there you have it. I mean, it's a large, bipedal, hair-covered animal. Now, I just read an interview that I was alluding to right before we played that, to where John had mentioned, you got to take one. to not shoot this, to not treat this like an animal, and to not shoot it because it walks on two legs and resembles a human type person, is kind of doing the animal itself an injustice. And that was, he's always kind of been a pro-kill kind of guy. Let's take one out and put it on the books.
Totally, like, it juxtaposed to some of the people that he was actually even involved with, like, Peter Byrne and some other folks. But like, what I really like about John Green is he takes a really analytical approach. Like he was a reporter, like, and like, a journalist, and back when journalism had a little bit of tact. Well, I'll just say that that's a jab at modern journalism. And there were some important, like, a lot of rules to live by for the journalist. So, but his whole point was, okay, so something is making these tracks. We should be able to figure out what this is. Like, that statement says that he's willing to, to take whatever the answer is. That's scientific. That's what journalism used to be. Like, so he was willing to allow this to be, like, it's either going to be a hoax and we can figure out who's making all of these tracks all around the world and how that ties into all the stories all around the world, or we should be able to find a creature, an ape, that's doing this. That's a really, really, like, profound, like, statement that somebody who's been thinking about this for a long time just comes off the cuff because of his backgrounds, and all the people that he's talked to, and just it's phenomenal to me. Like, something is making these tracks. We should be able to figure out what it is. If it's not a hoax, like, a hoax is easy. We've exposed hoaxes, like, every day we're exposing new hoaxes, right? That's fine. Like, what is making all of these footprints is a question. Like, you look at this data, like the wall behind him here, and I see that Cripplefoot cast there again. That Cripplefoot cast, I don't think is a legitimate cast.
Well, that was one of the things that I was talking about with the guys was, in the days that that cast was made. Now we do know that the Ivan Marks connection to it wasn't actually who found it, that it was a butcher in town, and Ivan Marks was a secondary find on that, and Krantz was involved with it afterwards. That in the times that they casted that track, they thought it was a direct representation of the shape of the foot that left the print, and now in modern times we know it's just a matter of the impression that was left behind by the foot. It could have been a slip in the mud, it could have been a stagger that left that track weird in that footprint, and not even be a screwed up cripple foot at all. It could just be the substrate that the track was left upon to begin with.
It could be a lot of things, but
if you look at what I was going to say, if you look at the other examples, if you just eliminate that one square, directly behind him, he's got 12 more that have absolutely nothing to do with it, that don't look anything like
it. Exactly. So the anomalies and the extrapolations from that footprint, unfortunately, like, it could have been like the most legitimate find in the universe. We have to throw it out because it does not. One of these things is not like the other. One of these things does not belong. Let's throw it out.
That's exactly right. In science, that's exactly what happens to it. It gets dropped as though it never existed.
Exactly. Unfortunately, another thing that was recently on the Bigfoot Revolution, brought up by Mr. Phil Pauling, is a great example of this right here. Is that we have all of these different anecdotal pieces of evidence. There's one that we're talking about that we can pretty much assume needs to be thrown out. All of these other pieces have something to them that probably mean that they need to be thrown out. As a whole, they look compelling, which in a courtroom, if somebody says, hey, I have, so-and-so killed so-and-so, and I have 12 people that say that happened, well, that is compelling, and that person's probably going to be convicted. In science, each individual square behind this gentleman has to stand on its own merit and be verified individually, and then another one has to be like stand up and be verified individually to corroborate the two, and then we have something. So like that's the problem with looking at this topic scientifically, is that unless you're taking the data, it's all anecdotal, which works in the court of law, but we're not trying to convict a felon here. We're trying to prove that a species is an extant species, a contemporary species of ape, hitherto unknown to science. I mean, that's...
Exactly. Now, one of the things that I wanted to point out as well, though, is, and I do have a good example of that, is the purported Wallace casts. Now, this is supposedly what Wallace used to leave the footprints, that Jerry Crew found. Now, some of those tracks that were behind John Green were, in fact, the Jerry Crew prints that were there. So we can definitely tell that the tracks that this man's holding in his hands as though supposedly were the ones used to leave the tracks that are behind John Green has to be false as well, because the resulting tracks on the wall aren't shaped anywhere near like these ridiculous mock-ups. So in the same court of law, those being a result from these implications would be found not guilty. But yet, we still can't prove it because no one's really ever tried to cast these particular prosthetics.
So in the court of law, somebody could, a jury of people with opinions can be swayed to make it appear as though that was not involved with 100% certainty. Like, there are certain that is not involved. That foot right there does not look like the cast that we're looking at behind John Green in the other photo. Well, scientifically, we would have to take that shoe and put it in the same substrates and give it the same stride with a person, and then cast the result in order to prove or disprove, that in an experiment, that claim. I mean, that's science. I mean, we've all watched MythBusters, right? Like right. That's science. You have to put it to the test in order to prove or disprove anything. However, in a court of law, our opinions could sway us as a group. It could sway us as individual, like as an individual. Like that doesn't matter. But so the majority in our jury room says that every single Sasquatch track that was cast is Ray Wallace's footprint cast.
Exactly, and we have to prove them elsewise.
Yeah. And there was another gentleman, actually in one of the documentaries, Jeff, that you sent me for this, there was another gentleman who was actually trying to pull one over on, it was Bob Titmus, I believe.
Yeah, it was Bob Titmus and the boys, that's right. I believe that was in the Bigfoot, the Mysterious Monsters, hosted by Peter Graves.
Yes, that probably was. Guy... and so that the stride was longer, he knew what he was doing. They may have used the word hick, and he said, well, let's show him what those hicks can do.
Yeah, but they were rubber prosthetics that weren't leaving believable tracks that at the time were cast as Bigfoot tracks, because he did fool them at first, but they were quickly looked at and went, okay, well, this is somebody being a jackass.
Again, but that's the same thing. Like, we're throwing away hoaxes every day, but what we're not doing is putting ourselves in a situation to collect the data that's going to corroborate each individual find, or give us something that we can make correlations to, even to refer to later, whether or not here's the potential, but there's all these correlations that go together, and then that gives us a stronger ability to go back and say, hey, this area, this situation, this food source, like that, I can recreate my anecdotal evidence. Even doing that is gonna help us. So anyway,
right on. So here, okay, let's go ahead and backtrack just a moment or two, and we'll kick over to let's give people the actual biography on John himself. According to IMDb, as this is anyhow, John Green was born 1927, Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. Green attended the University of British Columbia and earned a master's degree in journalism from the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. A newspaper reporter by trade, John first began investigating Bigfoot sightings in his native Harrison Hot Springs, British Columbia in the 1950s. John frequently collaborated with fellow Bigfoot researcher Renee DeHaden. John was written about over 3,000 Sasquatch sightings, and that's coming up next. From 1968 to 1973, he wrote 3 short volumes centering of the events pertaining to the Pacific Coast on the Track of Sasquatch, The Year of the Sasquatch, and The Sasquatch File. These books have become standard references for the field, and of course they are, because nobody else has really written anything that's all that great. 1978 book Sasquatch, The Apes Among Us, has to be a staple among Bigfooters for sure. It's widely considered to be the groundbreaking work which thoroughly focuses on information about Bigfoot from areas east of the Rocky Mountains. The Don Amici character in Harry and the Hendersons was patterned after Green himself, and he is also the first person to develop an extensive computerized database on Bigfoot sightings. John Green has appeared as himself in documentaries Bigfoot, Man or Beast, and The Mysterious Monsters, the delightfully quirky Sasquatch Odyssey, The Hunt for Bigfoot. And that, in the nutshell, is what IMDb has to say about the man, John Green.
Which is phenomenal. Yeah, I mean, he wrote several books. He was in so many documentaries. Like it's hard to even like calculate how many documentaries this guy was in. But it's because he was in the Pacific Northwest, like British Columbia, California, Oregon, Washington. He was the catch-all for these stories, and he really did focus like kind of. Well, that's a pretty broad scope, but like locally for him, like this West Coast Bigfoot
Yeah, so go ahead and tell us
Sasquatch.
about the database. What's the database that we keep hearing about here?
Well, so what he did is he actually went through and he put together everything that he heard, all the stories that he amassed, everyone that would tell him something, he put into a database, and he in places parse opinions against this, like could look at percentages, and because there were so many stories, and let me just put this up here. There's no way to really explain it to you aside from that this is the database. I mean, there's all this information. There's these numbers, dates. He did a good job. Places. I can go way over here. It doesn't format easily. There's all these numbers and things that don't mean anything, and all these descriptions, of the actual events, and you continue over a while here, and actually, like, who gave you this story? I mean, there's somewhere like Grover Krantz, tells so and so's story, like all these interesting stories. But if you scroll up and down here, I mean, there's thousands and thousands of these events. These are incidents. It could be footprints, it could be somebody's sighting, it could be an experience, whatever it is. And he started looking at these by region, by a time of year, by analytically breaking them down and putting percents. Like, okay, well, one of the problems that I see with some of this data is that the percentages that he's coming up with are very small. The percentage of sightings that are this versus the percentage of sightings that are between 6 and 30%. There's a lot of poorly documented, not on his part. I mean, there's a lot of data here, right, but a lot of poorly documented data, or maybe some things that are not so truthful, whatever. But the fact that this is all here, and we can parse through it, we can look at all the parts and pieces, and we can put it together. You
could literally take that one column where it describes the actual encounter itself. Bigfoot walking down the road, Bigfoot walking up to a tent, blah 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 blah. That one particular entrance, and parse through just that particular piece of information, and pull possible Bigfoot behaviors directly out of that. You can see where you have 100 different incidences where they walk up to a tent and, huff and puff and walk away. Is that something that's a direct correlation to what a Sasquatch does, or is that just because those are the only incidents that get reported?
Well, so you can have a direct correlation to what's happening, but also you can say, okay, well, 30% of the time we see Sasquatch crossing the road, which is what he went and did. And I want to talk about this. It's the Sasquatch database.com, or not, the www.sasquatchdatabase.com. John Green, you can put like an advanced search in here, and just show like. I mean, there's an amazing amount of, you can actually, Jeff tried this actually, you can just say like, 1 mile from town or whatever, and just look up all the reports 1 mile from town, but there's pages and pages and pages of ways that you can parse through this information. I mean, this is fantastic, and this helps you. You can download the entire CVS file, which is what I was showing you, and kind of reformatted poorly for podcasting. But also, there's these really interesting articles that he wrote based on some of his findings. Elapsed time of reports Sasquatch sighting. Do Sasquatch migrate? He's got opinions about that. We could do a whole separate show just on this one page, like on the scent of Sasquatch, breast, sex, and ashes, observations of actions physically beyond human ability. Over the course of thousands of documents, like, you can come up with this stuff, like water and Sasquatch. This is a really interesting one. I think we should open this up in a second. When to see a Sasquatch, I didn't get that to open up. What were the witnesses doing at the time when they saw the Sasquatch? Who are the witnesses? So he can actually look at a lot of this information, which isn't there for each individual sighting, but we always talk about water and Sasquatch, and he comes to similar conclusions to what we're actually talking about on a regular basis here. Oh, it popped up in a different window, of course. It is common knowledge that Sasquatch, unlike other apes, are quite often reported in some sort of association with water in some way, and he's talking about swimming here, and basically percentages in the contact category are 7.8% in British Columbia and 6.1% in Washington, 5.3% in Oregon, and 4.2% in California, and 6% in the other states and provinces. So at least 6% of the time, Sasquatch is at or in water. And he talks about, swimming. He talks about, actually, he brings up twice the Nooksack River, which is where I'm looking. And also he brings up Bluff Creek and a couple other areas, and talking about swimming Sasquatches and other things like that. Fascinating stuff that he brought this in an analytical way. Like, he didn't just, make this up. This stuff was made up, and he drew correlations for it, based on what was told to him. And
there, what the real crying shame of it is nobody's continuing that work. I mean, the BFRO database is not the same type of animal that this is, and it is nowhere near even the anecdotal information that is contained in this database. And it's a shame, because in the digital age you would think that every single report would be able to be collected in a database like this, but that's just not what's happening.
Yeah, and BFRO quote unquote verified all of these things, but the way that maybe there's some sort of underlying data that they can access or something, but really for my purpose and for Jeff's purpose, it is like Bigfoot campfire stories, pretty much, and it's a way of showing some interesting stories by area, but they're only taking the stories that they can take, and there's not that many BFRO members. Like, in my area in particular, there was somebody who was doing research here that moved out of the area, and then came back and moved out of the area. The only stories that we have are when that gentleman happened to be in the area.
Right. No one kept track of it when he wasn't there any longer. So
exactly. So from the late 70s, early 80s to the 90s, and then after 2003, nothing. But that was when this one particular person was living in the area. So it would be fascinating to find out what what happened in between? Like, why can't we do this? Where is our point person? Where's the database that's open access for everyone? And just have like John Green's database. It was all the stories that came through him because there wasn't an internet. It wasn't like you couldn't add to the database. You know,
Yeah, that's
it had to
another
come
thing.
through him. But like
By,
not
like,
all of these
telephone.
stories are yeah.
You
All
know,
of these stories are 100% for sure and verified, but there's so much data there that you can say like, okay, half of these stories are bunk. Then when he says 7% in Washington are correlated to waterways, that's probably more like 14%. And the other are like 30% on the road, so that's traveling, and like, you know, these other things don't make any sense. That's still a really strong correlation.
Right, and when you look at the major percentages of it, you know, it comes down to, yeah, it might only be 6% that are seen on the road, or that are seen in the water, but you take away the 30% that are crossing the road and the 40% that are eating something, then you're only dealing with a much smaller overall percentage of other types of sightings. So out of the remaining 30%, 6% of those are actually at the water. Could be considerably higher numbers, you know what I mean? Could be considerably more interesting thinking of the total overall percentage that you're actually left dealing with. That was one of the things. I had this big long conversation with Justin while we were up there about you know, Sasquatch and primates and how long they stay with their mothers. You know, how long would a baby Sasquatch hang out with his mom? Well, we found, you know, we figure the apes are up to like 12 years old. They're still hanging out with mom pretty close. You know, Sasquatch probably are going to be very much the same type of thing. He's like, well, how do we know the Sasquatch lived to be older than 12 years old? I was like, well, if we're chasing a primate and we're chasing a big primate, the rules of biology say that the bigger you are, the longer you live. An elephant outlives a mouse. It's mammals. It's the way it works. The bigger you are, kind of the longer the lifespan you have. You look at the smaller monkeys, 15, 20, 22 years. Look at the chimps, the orangs, you know, they're 25 to 35 years. And then you look at the gorillas, and they're, you know, 35, 40 years. However, that's what they're calling average lifespan. That also takes into the account the high mortality rate of infants and youngsters. If we take just the adult population and take an average lifespan of the adult populations, the one that actually lived to be surviving and breeding and having a happy long life, they're living a lot longer than 35 years. They're living to be 45 and 50 years old before they actually die. So of the animals that we're dealing with that have survived past maturity, you know, we're probably dealing with some animals that have some actual age on them.
Exactly, where dental death becomes like the more likely candidate versus, you know, I don't know what we kill a Sasquatch in the wild. I can't even think of something right now.
A bear, a big old black bear. I mean, it's only going to take a claw the wrong way, just like it would to any other primate, for that animal to come down. You can disembowel a Bigfoot the same way you can disembowel a human. It doesn't really take a whole lot in the wrong way to make them infect and die out.
Well, I was going to say, like, infection is probably the bigger
it's
problem.
Most likely, but you know, once they get to that age, once they get to that survivability age, they're probably going to live to be 45, 50, maybe even older, since, you know, we consider them 9-footers to be a big male, right? You know, 7-footers to be a big female. Well, humans live to be 70 because of modern health care. In the wild, we wouldn't live that long. We'd still only live to be 35, probably the most, without modern health care. So,
well, even in modern society, without the most modern health care, like our life expectancy has increased by 15 years in the last 10 years. I mean, like, so that's something to really take into account. But the thing that's really interesting, though, is like even at 35, 45, 50 years, Sasquatch probably, like other apes, would be grandparents.
oh, I would think so for sure.
And
yeah.
that could be part of a, like, you know, they're not going to be as close, like they're not as populous as chimpanzees in these large groups, but like possibly could be an interesting, that would be an interesting question. Like, is it rogue males or rogue females? You know, based on their breeding population needs, I would suggest that it would be rogue males because because of the lack of population, versus the chimpanzees need rogue females because of the abundance of population.
Right.
I mean that not the fact that they're not don't need to be protected and all that, but like the fact that their actual groups are large. But that's a real possibility, is to see 3 generations of that type of ape all at the same time. It happens in gorillas. It happens it doesn't happen in orangutans because they're solitary. But that's something that could.
Right, but the orangutans also seem to be the step against the rule. They seem to step outside of the box, where all the rest of the primates tend to live in smaller pod groups. And that's one of the things that I've been reconsidering this year is one of my thoughts on how solitary these animals might be. I liken them a lot to bears, as far as the way they would have to feed in those type of feeding grounds. And I was absolutely correct in a lot of my assumptions up there with the way they would have to feed. But if you have an alpha male in control of a half of a peak up there, he's got 4 to 5 females roaming whatever that claimed territory actually is. And just like any other primate, a big male is going to claim his territory. So if you've got a single male alpha and 5 females that he's breeding with juveniles up to the age of 12 hanging around them, you very well could have 20 Sasquatch within that claimed alpha male's territory at any given time. But how big is that territory? Nobody knows. And those females most likely are not going to be living like gorillas. And I say that only because they'd be much easier to find if they were. So most likely what we have are the single pod group females with their juveniles living in separate locations amongst the claimed territory of that alpha male, and they probably keep their distance that way. Well, so, otherwise, we'd find giant swaths of land, food that were wiped out by 15 female and baby Sasquatch.
So one of the interesting things to think about with all the modern apes is that they all have different social structures, including us, orangutans, chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, and us. We all have very different social structures that we live under, and those are all based on environmental pressures. So what are the environmental pressures of the Sasquatch? Well, we don't know.
Right.
So to say that they live like any of those other ones, it seemed that the social structure is totally plastic it into any shape and form that you need to, based on the needs of the environment. So saying that Sasquatch is going to live more like an orangutan versus a gorilla, it's really you might as well just say, well, they're going to live like a bear, and that's how it is. But right. They're not a bear.
Right, and like I said, the only liking I ever used to do to them with a bear was for the food sources, because that's what they have to be eating on. But, the more I look at it, like I said, if you've got, even if you've got 8 Sasquatch hanging out, a couple of females and some juveniles together, they're going to cut a swath of food that you should be able to just follow right up to wherever the hell they are. And we're not finding that. We're not finding giant pods of food that are just eradicated by some group of primates sitting down and eating. That's how they found the gorillas. I mean, they literally found the destruction of the gorillas and followed them to where they were. And we're not finding that in these locations. That's why I have a problem believing that these things are so elusive, and specifically only picking 2 berries off of this bush and 3 berries off of that bush, and not just decimating the bushes as a large pod of these things would move through. That would drive out all the other animals to the area. You wouldn't have any deer, you wouldn't have any bear, because the monkeys are eating all the food.
Yeah, well, but you'd have to have a lot of monkeys to be able to decimate that swath of destruction, it was somebody who was who I talked to that was in the course of their anthropology classes came up, and they were like, it would make the most sense in this area for Sasquatch to be a patch eater, to just hunker down on the resources and just deplete an entire area and then move on. So my first question to them was well, if that was the case, we would definitely find more sign, right? It's well, not if they were not abundant. And I was but we would still, somebody would have come across this sign. So the thought being is that, so an orangutan and a gorilla, those are patch eaters. They hunker down on a resource and they deplete it and then they move on when it's done. Chimpanzees are different, and they patrol and they move and they do different things, and they also take more protein because of this. Like they need more energy, they need more. They need a lot of things. So bonobos don't come through, and they don't. I mean, they do. They patrol. They're not as on this same sort of defensive as the other, as the chimpanzees, but they do move enough to where they're not patch eating in the way that the gorillas and orangutans do. So that's something I'm like, well, that makes more sense, because if you're gonna be a bipedal ape, you're probably more temporary than our split from these species. But that means, okay, well then it would make sense that we're not seeing that sort of swath of destruction of a patch eater, because this is probably a more contemporary ape that we're dealing with.
Right, and that's exactly what I'm still feeling that diversion somewhere between gorilla and human, that bipedal turn. Not quite us, not quite them, somewhere in between, and Sasquatch is what's left from that spiderweb evolution where all those genes just fought for battle, and that's what we've got left over in our particular part of the world. We had a nice long conversation about the orang pendek with Adam. That's kind of his birth child. He really would like to see that, and to all of us would really like to see that one come true, because it seems to be the one that has the most abundant amount of resources thrown at it at the moment, because it's probably just going to be the case of a Billy Ape type discovery. It's going to be a bipedal orangutan that lives in the jungle down there. They got isolated from the other orangutans, 20 million years ago, and just happened to evolve separately. Some kind of a natural disaster, some kind of, something separated large populations of the orangutan, and the orang pendek is what's left over. And that area is just riddled with volcano activity and all kind of stuff. So it really wouldn't be that big of a stretch for something like that to have happened, but we'll see how that comes out. I mean, the orang pendek, that's the one with the divergent toe on the big foot still.
Yeah, so not Homo floresiensis.
No, not the Hobbit.
Yeah, which is my Homo erectus divergent homeboy there. But so actually, like on air right now, because I love to talk about all the fossil finds of late. Jeff sent me a link to what was it? Homo habilis found encased in ice, 1.4 million years old, encased in ice in the Himalayas. Unfortunately, this was the weekly world news, basically.
Yeah, it was I think the title of the news source was you can't be trusted news or something like that.
Yeah, pretty much. I think it was talking about like tobacco-free cigarettes, all the rage with children. Somebody like man with 3 balls in India.
Worldnewsdailyreport.com.
Yeah,
Nepal, frozen caveman discovered in Himalaya.
Frozen caveman. Well, the first thing I was like reading, I was like, oh my! Like I didn't even read anything. I just went directly into the content. It seemed pretty legit. And then they wwere talking about so it was habilis, and they were talking about a spear and tanned leather, and I'm like, that's not habilis. Yeah, wait a minute. And I looked up top, and I'm like, oh my god. Yeah.
The reason that I sent that to you is because I knew I'd get you with it, of course.
Yeah, it was like,
but somebody had posted that on Facebook. I saw it pop up in my news feed, and I did the same thing. I ran right out and looked at it, and I'm like, really? Oh, that'll be freaking cool. And I looked at the date it was published. I was like, June 12th. Okay, that makes sense. Why didn't I see this? And then I started reading through it, and I went, oh, because it's at the worldnewsdailyreport.com. Yeah.
But like 5 other websites picked this up. Like, people check the sources. The first thing I did is I looked up Himalaya habilis 2014. The only thing that I came up with was this article. So it's bunk.
100% not legit, people. Sorry to fool you, but it was one of those things that you gotta pay attention to your sources. This would be awesome if it were true, but it's not.
It is not.
Sadly, it is not. You know, David, that's our time for this week, brother, man. Bang! You know, John Green, when it really comes down to it, John Green is still with us. He still living in British Columbia. You know, I would like, if any of the fans of the Squatchers Lounge out there have access to John, we would absolutely love to do a telephone interview with him. David and I will conduct it with the utmost respect for the gentleman because we have nothing more but that for him. So let's go ahead and put that out there. If anybody's got a contact to John Green, we would love to do a phone interview with him if he's, you know, willing and able to do such a thing. You know, his biggest contribution, honestly, has to be those 3,000 sightings in that database is just going to be invaluable because we just aren't ever going to be able to replace it. And thank goodness it's in a digital form.
Well, and people, go check out that website, the
Sasquatch database.
SasquatchDatabase.com, and just look at his thought process of taking in this information, and just being analytical and willing to find the other thing. It doesn't always have to be Sasquatch. Like, you know, just be willing to just take the data as it is, and draw those correlations and say, well, is there something usable in here? I've always respected the man for that. Like, he's, you know, he's put a lot of time and effort into this field, but at the same time, I think he would be just, you know, this is all hokery if we could prove that in some way, shape, or form. Because we should be, like he says, we should be able to figure out what's making these tracks one way or the other.
I 100% agree, and I would say over the years, fundamentally, no one has proven that all of these tracks are fake. Some of them, yes, not all of them, no. Therefore, when you eliminate everything else in between, and something still remains, chances are there's a 7-foot wood ape out there that we still haven't put on our identification list yet.
And just like our friend Phil Pauling says, in a courtroom, while we have damning evidence against a certain subset of footprints and costumes and videos or whatever, each individual piece of evidence scientifically has to stand up on its own. So just because you could convince a courtroom that Sasquatch is all hoax, it doesn't mean that's true either. That needle tips both ways. So, again, document everything around you every time you have something going on, and help us draw correlations so that we can repeat those findings. And
That's it. Right on, David, brother. Everybody, got to thank you very much for joining into the Squatchers Lounge podcast this week. There are definitely more videos and information coming from my trip last week. All recovered, caught up with work, so I'm going to start working on that stuff tomorrow. By the weekend, we'll have some of that more stuff out for you. It has been an awesome week. We're going to continue on with our series of the Who Was series, you know, with the Four Horsemen. Who are we going to continue on with next week, David?
Let's do Peter Byrne next week. That'll be a good one.
Yes,
so just like, because we started with Grover Krantz and we went into John Green, we decided, well, the Four Horsemen, the Who Is, that's a good thing. So we'll do Peter Byrne, and then Rain Dehendon, like, would be the next one. That's the right way to go, I think.
Absolutely, I agree with you 100%. This series is really fun. You know, we're keeping up with the current stuff that's going on, but looking back is very much important. And like we usually look back on at the very end of the show, we look back at, would we look at John Green's information differently today than we looked at it when we first actually assessed it from the beginning? And I would actually have to say, personally, I still look at it today every bit as much as I did the first time I looked at it as an adult. You know, not as a child, but as an adult, the same way. The fundamentals are there, and I can't find fault with really any of it. He took all of the sighting reports and put them together and allowed you to eliminate what your brain can't fathom. And that's what I appreciate about it.
Exactly. You can take that database, you can whittle it down to just your area, and then you can follow up on what you want. I mean, he has contact information for the people that gave the report in the first place, so you can follow up on this. It's invaluable. It's perfect. It's what reporting was and should be. I've always had respect for this guy, like, and looking back, like, again, getting from newbie to this field, I look back on this and, like, John Green, you are the man.
Absolutely. And that's going to do it for us this week, folks, on the Squatchers Lounge podcast. For David Batdorf, I am the Reverend Jeff Kelly. This has been Season 2, Episode 25. Who is John Green? Thanks for joining us, guys. We'll see you next Wednesday. Have a wonderful night, and may the Squatch be with you.